Today's critique focuses on a submitted overview explaining the distinct roles and strategic maneuvers of major world powers in the escalating U.S. Israeli war with Iran.
Right.
The analysis of Russia's role accurately identifies its baseline support for Iran, but the section requires a deeper exploration of Moscow's strategic hedging and the limitations of its regional leverage.
Yeah. Where the draft really loses me right off the bat is how it portrays that support. The weakness here is that the current draft paints Russia's stance as this straightforward, uncritical support for Tehran.
I mean, it treats it almost like a monolith.
Exactly. A monolithic brotherhood. It completely overlooks the nuanced reality that Russia is, actively avoiding direct military entanglement. They're using the conflict as a geopolitical distraction while facing a severe loss of diplomatic leverage as the Iranian nuclear framework collapses.
Right. By simplifying Russia's role like that, the text just misses the complex vulnerabilities Moscow's dealing with right now.
So the suggestion for improvement here is to expand a Russia section to reflect the highly transactional nature of this alliance. The author really needs to highlight how Moscow balances its immediate benefits against the systemic risks of a completely destabilized Middle East.
Let's get into some concrete examples for improvement, because there are a lot of ways to solve this framing issue. For instance, you could detail exactly how Russia benefits from the U.S. distraction and, of course, the surging oil prices.
Oh, definitely. I mean, you have Brent crude pushing well past $100 a barrel, and we've seen Russian envoys literally celebrating the economic fallout.
Right, popping champagne, basically.
Yeah, because those high prices fund their own war machine. And meanwhile, the U.S. is deeply involved militarily. The White House just reported a 7th American service member dead, and they haven't ruled out ground troops.
Which is a massive immediate windfall for Moscow, having Washington's attention dragged away like that. But to make the analysis truly robust, the author should contrast that short-term benefit with the strategic terror Moscow is actually facing. You could incorporate that recent Chatham House analysis.
Right, the one showing that a severely weakened Iran deprives Moscow of a crucial regional counterweight.
Exactly. Because if Iran's regime collapses, Russia loses its only real heavy-hitting partner in the region. Yes, they love the oil revenue today, but they are terrified of the systemic vacuum tomorrow.
And another concrete example you could use to show that shifting dynamic is Russia's military supply chain. You might note that Russia has internalized its own drone production recently.
That's a great point.
Yeah, they just aren't as operationally dependent on Tehran for their war in Ukraine as they were at the start. Including that detail shifts the narrative from, Moscow desperately needing Iranian weapons to Moscow managing a volatile partnership with calculated distance.
And speaking of that calculated distance, another great angle is diplomacy. The text mentions President Putin's official congratulatory telegram to Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei.
Right after his father was assassinated at the start of the war?
Yeah, but the draft just presents that telegram as standard diplomatic protocol. Instead, you could frame it as a crucial diplomatic anchor in an otherwise highly volatile strategic environment.
I see what you mean. Because the previous architecture of their strategy in the Middle East is just crumbling.
Exactly. With the JCPOA framework basically gone, Russia loses its role as the indispensable mediator. So sending that telegram is a calculated scramble to maintain visibility. Incorporating these examples, the internalized drone production, the Chatham House analysis, the telegram, takes the section from a static snapshot to a dynamic evaluation of a geopolitical tightrope walk.
I completely agree. Moving on. The framing of the direct military actions between Israel and Iran captures the kinetic reality of the conflict, yet it overlooks the strategic shift toward targeting critical civilian survival infrastructure to force domestic capitulation.
This is where the draft feels like it's missing the forest for the trees. The weakness is that the submitted material merely lists strikes on oil installations and drone attacks, treating them as standard military exchanges.
Yeah, it reads like a sterile ledger of munitions fired.
Right, a drone intercepted here, some falling debris near Dubai's airport there. This approach totally fails to address the underlying psychological and environmental warfare at play. It significantly dilutes the so what of how this specific war is being fought compared to historical conflicts.
So the suggestion here is to elevate this section by analyzing the specific intent behind these infrastructure strikes.
The author needs to shift the focus from the explosions themselves to the cascading environmental and societal consequences designed to break civilian resilience.
We really need to unpack the strategic theory behind the destruction. To strengthen this, a concrete example for improvement would be to discuss Israel's strategy of incinerating fuel depots in Tehran.
Right, with the explicit goal of sparking a civilian uprising.
Exactly. Rather than just saying oil installations were hit, explain the horrifying aftermath. These strikes are creating toxic acid rain and coating the entire city in soot.
I mean, think about the reports from the Iranian Red Crescent Society warning about sulfur and nitrogen oxides filling the air. You literally have unrefined oil leaking into the streets, while the rain falling from the sky is a severe health hazard.
And the temperatures are dropping, right? It's cold. By detailing these environmental horrors, the author demonstrates how the environment itself is being weaponized to make daily life unbearable, hoping the population turns on their own government out of desperation.
But the author also needs to look at the other side of that coin. Environmental warfare goes both ways. Another concrete example to explore is Iran's asymmetric retaliation against essential life support systems.
You're talking about the desalination plants?
Exactly. The author could examine the deliberate targeting of water infrastructure in an incredibly arid region. You have up to 90% of drinking water in places like Kuwait coming from these advanced facilities.
And we've seen drone strikes hitting targets in Kuwait, plus those massive strikes on the Sitrat refinery in Bahrain.
Right. Highlighting this mutual shift toward ecocide and collective punishment gives the reader a much deeper understanding of the war's true stakes. It's not just about degrading airstrips, it's a brutal war of attrition aimed at the foundational requirements of human life.
It's basically the old Rand Corporation doctrines of strategic bombing updated for a modern era. Utilizing these concrete examples completely transforms the relevance of the text. It turns a dry tactical briefing into a chilling examination of total warfare.
Which leads perfectly into the economic fallout.
Right, let's look at that. While the summary effectively notes the infrastructural damage suffered by regional players, the geopolitical angle would be significantly sharpened by examining the systemic economic paralysis forcing these nations into unprecedented defensive postures.
This is probably the most glaring missed opportunity in the text. The weakness is that the text currently treats regional powers like Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and the UAE as passive collateral victims of falling debris or localized strikes.
It reduces sovereign states to bystanders who are just geographically unlucky.
Exactly. And that narrow angle completely misses their active strategic responses and the massive logistical nightmare unfolding in the Gulf, which is the true driver of global economic anxiety right now.
The suggestion here is to pivot the angle of the regional power section from passive victimization to the active economic and logistical crisis, a crisis that is fundamentally altering global energy flows and forcing incredibly difficult diplomatic decisions.
To do that, let's provide some concrete examples for improvement. First, you could highlight how Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Bahrain are being forced to actively shut in millions of barrels of crude production.
And the crucial detail is why they're doing it. It's not just fear of getting bombed. It is because the Strait of Hormuz, which handles 20% of the world's oil, is effectively closed.
Right. The bathtub is full. If you plug the drain of the Strait of Hormuz, domestic storage tanks across the Gulf reach maximum capacity in days. They literally have nowhere to put the oil, so they have to cap the wells.
Which is a massive, risky logistical undertaking. You get wax buildup, pressure loss, permanent damage to the reservoir. Detailing this operational reality shows these production cuts are physical necessities, not just diplomatic signals.
Another concrete example you could weave in is Qatar Energy's stark warning that the entire region may soon declare force majeure on energy exports.
That is a terrifying prospect for the global economy.
It is. For readers who don't know, declaring force majeure legally allows these state-owned entities to halt export contracts without crippling penalties. And Bahrain already did this after the Sitrat refinery hit.
Pointing that out moves the narrative away from just falling debris near an airport to the legal and economic unraveling of the global energy market.
And to bring it all together, a final concrete example could be mentioning how this regional bottleneck is forcing external powers into a panic. You could weave in the fact that the G7 is holding emergency meetings to deliberate releasing strategic oil reserves as prices surge past $100 a barrel.
That creates such a fascinating contrast with the U.S. leadership. President Trump is publicly downplaying the economic impact, projecting confidence that prices will come down, but behind closed doors, the G7 is scrambling to flood the market just to prevent a total economic freeze.
Incorporating these examples, shutting in wells, force majeure declarations, the G7 panic, elevates the geopolitical angle entirely. It shows these regional players are actively managing the epicenter of a global supply chain collapse.
And that ties right back to the safety of the hundreds of thousands of U.S. citizens living and working in that region, many tied to these filling industries.
Exactly. It makes the piece vastly more original and impactful.
Well, that is a fantastic point to end on. To recap, the primary takeaways for strengthening this material involve deepening the complexity of Russia's strategic hedging, highlighting the shift toward environmental and psychological warfare between Israel and Iran, and elevating the regional analysis to focus on systemic economic paralysis.
Implementing these specific historical and economic contexts will make the analysis significantly more robust and globally resonant.
We would love to see how this piece evolves, so please feel free to submit your revised work back in for another critique.